Hey everybody, Josh Sigurdson of World Alternative Media here, and of course we're joined by author and economic analyst here at WAM, John Sneisen, and we have been reporting on silver and gold rigging forever now, and JP Morgan has always been able to kind of ride under the radar as they throw their friends like Deutsche Bank, HSBC, BNP Paribas, all these other banks, Scotiabank, under the bus. They've always seemed to get away with it, and of course February 2017, there's an appeals court that overturned the dismissal in the JP Morgan silver rigging case, and now it is back in the news, and of course this time they're not so lucky. They're not flying under the radar, because as the CNBC article says, former JP Morgan trader pleads guilty to manipulating U.S. metals markets for years. And as the article goes into, an ex-JP Morgan Chase trader has admitted to manipulating the U.S. markets of an array of precious metals for about 7 years. And he has implicated his supervisors at the bank. John Edmonds, 36, pleaded guilty to 1 count of commodities fraud and 1 count each of conspiracy to commit wire fraud, price manipulation, and spoofing, according to a Tuesday release from the U.S. Department of Justice. Edmonds spent 13 years at the New York-based JP Morgan until leaving last year, according to his LinkedIn account. As part of his plea, Edmonds said that from 2009 through 2015, he conspired with other JP Morgan traders to manipulate the prices of gold, silver, platinum, and palladium futures contracts on exchanges run by the CME Group. He and others routinely placed orders that were quickly canceled before the trades were executed, a price-distorting practice known as spoofing. And I quote, "For years, John Edmonds engaged in a sophisticated scheme to manipulate the market for precious metals futures contracts for his own gain by placing orders that were never intended to be executed," Assistant Attorney General Brian Benczkowski said in the release. Of note, for JP Morgan, the world's biggest investment bank by revenue, Edmonds, a relatively junior employee with the title of vice president, said that he learned this practice from more senior traders and that his supervisors at the firm knew of his actions. Further, Edmonds' case stemmed from an ongoing investigation run by the FBI's New York field office, the Justice Department said. Edmonds pleaded guilty under a charging document known as an information. Prosecutors routinely use them to charge defendants who have agreed to cooperate with an ongoing investigation of other people or entities. His sentencing is scheduled for December 19th. Edmonds faces up to 30 years in prison, but is likely to receive less time than that. The guilty plea was entered under seal October 9th and unsealed on Tuesday, and of course JP Morgan declined to comment. And what I find interesting as well about all of this is, of course they are going to use him as, to set an example. He's going to go to jail, but think of the amount of people that are already doing this, already part of this price manipulation, price rigging factor. It is just anyone that's ever worked in a major bank knows that this is going on around every door. It's nothing strange to see a big bank manipulating a market. And we've been reporting on this for a while. Whistleblowers came out as far back as 2010 against this at JP Morgan, but JP Morgan has always seemed to kind of move above it. Same with Goldman Sachs and a few other major banks. Banks like Deutsche Bank and HSBC have been charged in court and found guilty and all that kind of stuff. John, I want you to go into this a bit for us, because JP Morgan is, as bad as it sounds, one of the more stronger of the bankrupt banks. It was the last one this year to actually see red year to date, but when they saw red year to date, it made it so that all of the other banks, every single bank, had at that point seen red year to date in their shares. So JP Morgan is obviously not doing super well. What do you think about all of this?
Oh, Josh, the amount of manipulation that's going on in the market is nothing new, and especially this technique of spoofing in trading is definitely not new. It goes on all across the markets. We're talking about the stock markets, we're talking about bonds, whatever it is, and also the cryptocurrency markets. You see spoofing going on. It's just a simple way of trying to manipulate up or down the price by putting up fake contracts. It's a simple way in these types of markets where we have heavily financialized them. It's any person out there that have any amount of power would like to try to move the markets in the way that they want. So they have the power. If they have enough contracts on their hand, they could put out all these fake contracts. They could
the hand of God or the hand of Satan or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, they are the market makers and the market movers here when it comes to the market. JP Morgan also have mass amounts of physical silver that they accumulated, Josh. We got to talk about that. And that's probably has a lot to do with this spoofing scheme that, he was taught by the higher upper echelons, he said. And of course, why would you think that this is the guy? This is the only guy that did it, or the London whale that, this is the only guy that manipulated the bond markets, the LIBOR. It's just insane to think about that. It's just scapegoating, as you said, Josh. They're trying to get out the younger levels, that try to rise up to get up to these big guys, the partners and others that have been, teaching them to do this, so they could make the money and they could just let them make some money.
Throw them under the bus.
Sorry?
Again, throw them under the bus. That's the whole practice, is that they're doing it and then they throw the little guy under the bus like he's the one that's in charge of all of this crazy conspiracy.
No, it totally is, Josh. It's a great way for them to get rid of the up and coming people, and they do this all the time in the banks. They actually get rid of a lot of the people in the under management every year. They use them, for fraudulent activities most likely, and then they just drop them out, kick them off, get rid of them to trim the fat, so they could get more bonuses, more money to themselves. And this is it's just a way banking works. It's all about making money on money, and of course this is just one way, the trading part of it, and then you have the day-to-day banking where they borrow out money to people that can't afford it, and then they take their homes. There's so many schemes out there that these banks...
Wells Fargo knows a thing or two about that. And I want to kind of take it back a little bit, going back a bit, because of course gold and silver are wealth insurance, not necessarily meant as an investment. While you can invest in it, most people would invest in the futures or the ETFs, the paper contracts, which is kind of crazy, but whatever you want to do, guys. It's just, this goes back further. We've talked about this before. The ETFs, the exchange, or not just the ETFs, but the ESF, I should say, the Exchange Stabilization Fund, which, of course, FDR seized the gold in, 1932, 1933, and then used a bunch of that seized gold from the populace to fund the Exchange Stabilization Fund. This practice of manipulating gold, which we see from places like the Exchange Stabilization Fund, is a long and old and tried practice. In fact, the first paper currencies, the first IOUs, of course, were based either on wheat or on gold or silver, going back way back in history, where they'd hold a certain little amount of gold in their vault and then hand out way more IOUs than they had on that gold. And then when there was a bank run, the original bank runs, they'd come to the bank and it would be like, oh, you have 3 bricks of gold and you sold that 3 bricks of gold to like 800,000 people. Now what? So John, can you go into a little bit of why they manipulate these markets, other than, the desperation and trying to screw, a real wealth insurance?
Yeah, no, it's pretty easy why they're manipulating the markets is to make and benefit from themselves and make a whole bunch of money on it. As you said, all the way back to the goldsmiths that had gold deposits and then issued IOU notes to people that they had the gold, and and then people started to trade these certificates around the world, and then suddenly it came to a point where these goldsmiths have printed so much of these IOU notes, and they, as you said, they have so little to back it. It's the same thing today. It's the same thing with the gold ETF and the silver ETF. The gold ETF, the numbers there are close to 1,000 contracts per physical metal, and that should really scare. That's way worse than any goldsmith would probably love to have done back in the day, because now we got it all electronically. So much easier to manipulate and steal from people, Josh, that these guys are doing it just for their own benefit and for their own purpose. There's no other way to really say this other than to make money off other people's backs and scam off of people, steal from people. It's criminal activity, Josh. That's what it is on a high level in banking. And of course, they always scapegoat the lower little minions that they use to conduct this criminal activity. That's how they get away with all of this on a grand scale. And of course, they they pay off the government with all these fines. Like, look at all the fines that different corporations, banks have paid over the time over all these scams, frauds, and things that happened throughout 2008 and before that. They are just basically payoffs to the government to say like, hey, we made 10 times more money, but we will give you like 10% of that as a little bit of a benefit that we manipulate the market. So the government lets them do it. And of course, in the government, it's a revolving door because these guys, they control the government in the first place, which the government shouldn't be there, but because that's what enables, the control and the manipulation in the first place.
That's what they do best, though. That's what they do best. It's centralize and manipulate, and they've done it for centuries and with every fiat currency. And I mean, the whole idea is, it's no coincidence that all this manipulation coincides with all this debt, with all of these crashes throughout history, with all of these massive bubbles and bursts and booms and busts. It's no coincidence that it coincides with war and massive global warmongering. It is no coincidence that it coincides with the society of complete debt slaves and impoverished people, always asking for more centralization, manipulation, government, all that kind of stuff to solve the problems that the government and this manipulation caused in the first place. But two questions, John. Will this stop JP Morgan from continuing to do this, maybe even on a vaster scale? And number two, will they learn from this? Is anyone going to, end up going to jail over this?
No, nobody's going to learn from this. It's going to continue. It's going to continue until there is a call on on the markets that people want their physical metals. That's when it's going to stop being manipulated, because the way it's set up, Josh, it's way too easy for them to manipulate, to create more contracts, and rip people off big time, thinking that they own gold somehow by having a paper or an electronic contract somewhere. It's just utter bullshit, Josh. This is just going to continue until the banks have nothing left in their coffers, until every single penny of your deposits has been stolen. That's when it's all going to end, because they've run out of other people's money, and their whole scheme of debt and creation of that will end together with the end of people believing in their fake fiat currency system. That of course, the commercial banks, they create 10 times more money than the actual the treasury in the United States. So these commercial banks are the ones that are really on the forefront of the fraud, and they own the system itself. They own the Fed, they own the securities, and they own the CRTC. They are just there to make it look like something is getting done by all this fraud, so people feel a little bit better. Oh yeah, they're taking care of me. The government cares about me. They really care about me, and they want to make sure that I'm safe. Meanwhile, they're just continuing to ripping you off every single day, and you just sit there, and then they pay always a little bit of fee. All these big banks, Josh, they have their own litigation funds that they built up so they can actually pay off all the frauds that they commit. It's really interesting, isn't it, that you create
They're very prepared
fund and then you actually pay off it, and then of course that fund is coming from money that they stole in the first place. It's pretty hilarious and pretty ridiculous what is going on with the banks, Josh.
I would say that this whole issue is rather limited. It's a limited problem because, as I've said so often here at WHAM, if you shove that beach ball underwater long enough, it'll gain more and more pressure and it'll bounce up. In the end, they've been manipulating gold and silver down for a while. It's very undervalued in my opinion because of this massive amount of manipulation, but those banks are doing a lot of this out of desperation for themselves. Those banks are going to go down. They have to eventually, because just look at their balance sheets and that's all you really need to know, but look at history as well, and that'll finish that question off for you. Yes, they are going down, and when I say it's a limited issue is because it won't be prolonged. We will see it bounce up gold and silver and these other precious metals, and I think that it's important to mention that this is why we need to break outside of the banking system. We have so many opportunities outside of the banking system. We need to be independent, self-sustainable, as as we always go into food, water, shelter, self-defense, so you're not gathering things for the toughest guy in the block. And of course, gold and silver as wealth insurance. Not investment advice, historical maybe, but not investment advice. It is based on the fundamentals of scarcity, application use, demand, subjective value, and a history of preserving its wealth against massive fiat crashes that have gone on for almost 1,000 years, going back to 1024 AD in China. So I think it's quite obvious what we need to do there, and then looking at, decentralized cryptocurrencies and infrastructures that have true fundamental value and have a way to actually replace a lot of these markets we see today. You don't need the banking system. That's the old guard. You don't need the government. That's the old guard. We don't need those central banks. We must move on. We must be independent. We must decentralize everything. We must rule ourselves. And with that, we shall have true responsibility. And with that responsibility, then we will have true freedom. So, John, final words as we wrap this up?
Yeah, I just have one final word, and you were talking about gold and silver. I would just add to that physical gold and silver, not the
Yes.
garbage that they're cheating you with, of course.
Yes. And arm yourself and have, private vault or something.
No, exactly. You gotta keep it in physical possession. But I just want to make a fun point out of that because it's kind of funny with our topic here, Josh. But bottom line is, you gotta stop trusting these banks with your money. This is of course our opinion, but throughout time, banks have shown that they committed this fraudulent activity over and over again. It's just the way of their business plan, the way the corporation works. There's no other way else than actually saying that, Josh. So stop using all these banks and trusting them with all your money when you know that they are using it on a mass scale to commit fraud against you. It's just ridiculous, Josh. That's my bottom line. It's all I gotta say, because people have to start to exit out of the system, find other places, get decentralized, as you said, get off of the grid, off of the banking and government grid, and let's start our own society. This is getting ridiculous, Josh.
Yeah, free humanity, rule yourself, folks. Until next time, this is Josh Sigurdson and John Sneisen signing out from World Alternative Media. Find the truth, be the change. Like what you see here, OM? Don't forget to check the links below. GoFundMe, Patreon. We can't do it without you. Any donation is very much appreciated, especially as we are so vastly demonetized and censored on YouTube, as these guys come in and flag all of our content as hate speech. Also, check out our Bitcoin address below, as well as on the screen for you to scan if you please. And also check us out at steemit.com. We're at Josh Sigurdson. It's a future of social media where you get paid in the upvote of your post in cryptocurrency, Steem that is. So make sure to check us out there. Make sure to join us at Anarchapulco 2019 with people like Ron Paul, G. Edward Griffin, of course, Jeff Berwick, Vid Jedlicka. So many incredible speakers are going to be speaking. It's just a massively growing event. It is something you have to see to believe. So make sure to check it out below and save money on your tickets by using promo code WAM, that's WAM, and I hope to see you there. Also, check out our newsletter as we are getting demonetized and censored and all that. We don't know what comes next, so we have an email, worldalternativemedia@gmail.com. Send us an email with subject line YES, YES, and we will include you in the newsletter where we will continuously keep you updated. So until next time, thanks for watching, everyone. This is Josh Sigurdson signing out from World Alternative Media. Find the truth, be the change.
I'm sure you have already changed people's minds in your young age because you're involved, and I like that.